You are listening to HOA Debrief. I wish this was exaggerated. Take a breath and settle in, because this one is a ride. The level was still on the top rail when Karen yelled that she was measuring, and she loved when people failed in real time. "You are not allowed to do that without permission," she screamed, her voice cutting across my backyard like a siren. I turned around, still holding the gate latch I had been inspecting, and saw Tiffany Wilson marching across my lawn with a tape measure in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The yellow level was balanced on the top rail of the fence my contractor had just started building that morning, and she pointed at it like it was evidence of a crime. I live in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in a neighborhood controlled by Fairview HOA Incorporated, a place where the board calls everything a setback emergency. I work as a city bus driver who keeps odd hours, so I am usually home during the day when most people are at work. That morning I had taken a day off to oversee the fence installation. The contractor and his crew had been working since 8, and by noon they had 3 posts in the ground and 2 panels up. Everything was going smoothly until Tiffany showed up. She yanked the tape measure open and pressed it against the fence post, squinting at the numbers. "This is at least 6 inches over the setback line," she said, shaking her head like I had just confessed to a felony. I looked at her, then at the fence, then back at her. The fence was exactly where the city permit said it could be. I had the approved plans in my kitchen, stamped and signed by the city zoning office. I tried to keep my voice calm. The fence is on my property, and I have a city permit. She did not even look at me. She just kept measuring, her key ring jingling with every movement. "I am calling management, and I am going to be dramatic about it," she said, pulling out her phone. That is her catchphrase, and she uses it whenever she wants to remind you that she has power and you do not. Tiffany is the vendor coordinator for Fairview HOA, which means she is in charge of hiring contractors, scheduling maintenance, and most importantly, threatening anyone who does not follow her interpretation of the rules. The contractor, a middle-aged guy named Rick who had been installing fences in Grand Rapids for 20 years, walked over and wiped his hands on his jeans. "Ma'am, we have the city permit right here," he said, pulling a folded paper from his back pocket. "This fence is legal." Tiffany glanced at the permit like it was a napkin. "I do not care what the city says. This is an HOA matter, and you are violating the setback rules. You need to stop work immediately, or I will fine him." Rick looked at me, then back at Tiffany. "We are not stopping. We have a contract and a permit." She smiled, and it was the kind of smile that makes your stomach drop. "Fine," she said. "Then I will make sure you never work in this neighborhood again." She turned and walked away, her key ring still jingling, and I stood there with the gate latch in my hand trying to figure out what just happened. That night, I got an email from the Fairview HOA management office. It was a violation notice, dated that afternoon, claiming my fence violated Section 12.4 of the community guidelines, which required all fences to be set back at least 18 inches from the property line. The email included a fine schedule, $500 immediately, and an additional $100 per day until the fence was removed or corrected. At the bottom, there was a line that said failure to comply may result in legal action, including liens and forced removal at the homeowner expense. I read the email 3 times, trying to make sense of it. My fence was not 18 inches from the property line. It was 3 feet from the property line, exactly where the city permit required it to be. I pulled up the HOA guidelines on my laptop and searched for Section 12.4. The section existed, but it said nothing about 18 inches. It said fences must comply with local zoning ordinances. That was it. No specific setback measurements, no additional restrictions. Just comply with local zoning. I emailed back, attaching a copy of the city permit and a screenshot of Section 12.4. I explained that my fence was fully compliant with local zoning, and that the HOA guidelines did not include the 18-inch rule Tiffany was claiming. I hit send and went to bed, hoping that would be the end of it. The next morning I got a reply. It was not from the management office. It was from Tiffany, and she had CC'd the entire HOA board. Her email was 3 paragraphs long, and every sentence was dripping with condescension. She said I was misinterpreting the guidelines, that the 18-inch rule had been in effect for years, and that I should have read the rules before I moved in, sweetheart. That last line stung, and I knew she had used it on purpose. She was trying to bait me into getting angry, into writing something she could screenshot and send around the neighborhood group chat. I did not take the bait. Instead, I called the city zoning office and asked them to confirm that my fence was legal. The woman on the phone pulled up my permit and said everything looked fine. She even offered to send me a written confirmation, which I accepted. 20 minutes later, I had an email from the city stating that my fence complied with all local ordinances and that the HOA could not override city zoning regulations. I forwarded the email to Tiffany and the HOA board, along with a polite request to withdraw the violation notice. An hour later, I got another email from Tiffany. This one was shorter. She said the HOA was reinterpreting the guidelines to clarify compliance standards and that my fence still violated the updated interpretation. She attached a new document, dated that morning, which included a detailed setback chart that had never existed before. According to the chart, my fence was now 6 inches over the line. I stared at the email trying to process what I was seeing. She had just invented a new rule, backdated it to make it look official, and applied it to my fence retroactively. It was the kind of move that would have been funny if it was not happening to me. I called Rick, the contractor, and told him what was going on. He sighed. Yeah, she tried this with another guy last year. Ended up costing him $3,000 in legal fees before the HOA backed down. You need to document everything. That is when I started keeping records. I took photos of the fence every day, documenting the progress and the exact placement. I saved every email, every violation notice, every phone call log. I even set up a doorbell camera aimed at the backyard, just in case Tiffany decided to escalate things physically. I was trying to keep my record clean because of background checks at work. The City Transit Authority does not mess around with employees who have legal issues, and I could not afford to have an HOA lien or lawsuit on my record. 2 days later, Tiffany showed up again. This time, she was not alone. She brought a guy with a rolling file cart, the kind you see in offices when someone is moving a ton of paperwork. The cart was stacked with folders, binders, and loose papers, all marked with the Fairview HOA logo. Tiffany wheeled it right up to the fence line and started pulling out documents. This is every enforcement case I have handled in the last 3 years, she said, not even looking at me. I want you to see what happens when people ignore the rules. Rick was there again, finishing up the last 2 panels. He glanced at Tiffany and the cart, then shook his head and kept working. She started reading off case numbers, violation types, and outcomes, all while standing less than 5 feet from the fence. It was a performance, a power move designed to make me feel small and overwhelmed. I let her finish, then I said, I have payment confirmations proving I was never delinquent despite their fee blast. She stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone and showed her the payment history for my HOA dues. Every month, on time, for the past 2 years. No missed payments, no late fees, nothing. She frowned. That is not relevant. This is about the fence, not your dues. I shrugged. You said I should have read the rules before I moved in. I did. And I paid on time. So whatever you are trying to imply about me being a problem resident, it does not hold up. She did not respond. She just wheeled the cart back to her car and drove away. But the next day, I got another email. This one was worse. It said the HOA was denying my request for copies of the original community guidelines unless I paid a $200 copy fee and waited 30 days for processing. I needed those guidelines to prove that the 18-inch rule had never existed, and she was blocking my access to them unless I paid ridiculous copy fees and waited 30 days. That same afternoon, my neighbor Angela knocked on my door. She is a paralegal who works from home, and we had talked a few times about the HOA nonsense. She handed me a USB drive. I caught Tiffany on my doorbell video last night, she said. She was walking around your fence line with a flashlight at like 11 p.m. I thought you should see it. I plugged in the drive and watched the footage. Sure enough, there was Tiffany walking slowly along the fence, shining a flashlight on the posts and panels. She was not measuring anything. She was just looking, like she was trying to find something wrong. I burned a copy of the footage and added it to my evidence folder. Angela also told me something I had not known before. Tiffany had a cozy relationship with a tow vendor who worked in the neighborhood. Angela had pulled the HOA call logs from a public records request last year, and the logs showed dozens of calls between Tiffany and the tow company, way more than would be normal for a neighborhood this size. It smelled like a kickback scheme, but I did not have enough proof yet. A week later, Rick finished the fence. It looked great, and it was exactly where it was supposed to be. But the HOA was not done. The next violation notice included a stop work order even though the work was already finished, and a demand for a professional survey to prove the fence was on my property. The survey would cost me $1,500, and the notice said I had 10 days to provide it or face a lien. I called a surveyor and scheduled an appointment. He came out 2 days later with a crew and spent 4 hours measuring, staking, and documenting the property line. When he finished, he handed me a report. Your fence is 3 feet inside your property line, he said. It is not even close to the boundary. You are fine. I paid him, added the report to my evidence folder, and emailed a copy to Tiffany and the HOA board. Her reply came within an hour. She said the survey was incomplete because it did not include an easement analysis, and that I would need to hire a licensed land use attorney to interpret the results. I called the surveyor back and asked if that was true. He laughed. No, man. The report is complete. She is just stalling. If she wants an easement analysis, she can pay for it herself. That night, I got a text from Angela. She said Tiffany had been posting in the neighborhood group chat, telling people that I was building an illegal fence and refusing to cooperate with the HOA. Angela sent me screenshots of the messages. They were full of half-truths and outright lies, and they were clearly designed to turn the neighborhood against me. One message said I had threatened a contractor. Another said I was ignoring city zoning regulations. None of it was true, but people were starting to believe it. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more wild HOA drama. I decided it was time to stop playing defense. I had been collecting evidence for weeks, and I had more than enough to prove that Tiffany was making things up as she went along. But I also had something else, something I had not told anyone yet. I let her say my name loud, because later I wanted it on the recording. A few days earlier, I had attended an HOA board meeting, and Tiffany had spent 10 minutes ranting about my fence. She had said my name at least a dozen times, always with that condescending tone, and I had recorded the entire meeting on my phone. But that was not the trump card. The trump card was a screenshot of the HOA group chat coordinating retaliation. Angela had access to the private board chat, the one where the board members talked behind closed doors. She had pulled up a thread from 2 weeks earlier, right after I first challenged Tiffany on the setback rule. The thread showed Tiffany, the HOA president, and 2 other board members discussing how to shut me down. They talked about inventing new rules, blocking my access to documents, and even contacting my employer to report a fake code violation on my property. It was all there, in writing, and it was enough to blow the whole thing wide open. But I did not reveal it yet. I was waiting for the right moment, and that moment came a few days later. Tiffany scheduled an emergency HOA hearing to discuss my fence, and she made it clear that the board was planning to vote on a forced removal. The hearing was set for 6 p.m. on a Thursday, and the management office closes at 5, so I knew I had one shot to deliver the dispute packet in person before the hearing started. I spent the day organizing everything: the city permit, the survey report, the payment confirmations, the doorbell footage, Angela's witness statement, and the group chat screenshots. I put it all in a binder, printed extra copies, and drove to the management office at 4:30. The office manager looked annoyed when I walked in, but she accepted the packet and stamped it received. I asked for a copy of the stamp, and she rolled her eyes but gave it to me. At 5:50, I walked into the HOA clubhouse. The hearing room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. About 20 people were there, most of them curious neighbors who had heard about the drama. Tiffany was at the front table with her rolling file cart, shuffling papers and whispering to the HOA president. She saw me walk in and smiled. The hearing started at 6 on the dot. The president read the agenda, which included my fence as item 3. When they got to my case, Tiffany stood up and launched into a speech. She talked about the importance of community standards, the need for strict enforcement, and the dangers of letting residents ignore the rules. She said my fence was a safety concern because it blocked her view of my yard, and that I had refused to cooperate with the HOA at every turn. She held up the rolling file cart like it was evidence of my guilt. When she finished, the president asked if I wanted to respond. I stood up, walked to the front, and placed my binder on the table. I started with the city permit, explaining that the fence was fully compliant with local zoning. Then I showed the survey report, which proved the fence was 3 feet inside my property line. Then I showed the payment confirmations, which proved I had never been delinquent on my HOA dues. The room was silent. Then I pulled out my phone and played the clip from the board meeting. It was Tiffany's voice, loud and clear, saying my name over and over again, calling me non-compliant and difficult. Then I played the doorbell footage of her walking around my fence at night. And then, finally, I played the screenshot of the HOA group chat on speaker outside the clubhouse so neighbors hear it in real time. I had connected my phone to a portable speaker and set it up near the door so people outside could hear it too. The messages were devastating. The board had talked about fabricating violations, blocking my access to records, and contacting my employer with false complaints. It was all there, in their own words. The room exploded. People started shouting questions at the board, demanding to know if the messages were real. Tiffany tried to interrupt, but the president waved her off. The president looked at the screenshots, then at Tiffany, then back at me. He said the board would take a 10-minute recess to review the evidence. During the recess, Angela pulled me aside and told me that 3 other residents had been hit with similar retaliation tactics. One had been fined for painting his house the wrong shade of white. Another had been threatened with a lien for parking his work truck in his driveway overnight. All of them had evidence, and all of them were ready to file complaints with the state HOA Oversight Board. When the hearing resumed, the president asked Tiffany to explain the group chat messages. She tried to deflect, saying the messages were taken out of context and that the board had been discussing general enforcement policies, not targeting me specifically. But the screenshots were too clear. The board had used my name, my address, and specific details about my fence. There was no way to spin it. One of the other board members, a retired lawyer named Harold, stood up and said the board had acted improperly. He moved to rescind all violations and fines related to my fence, and to issue a formal apology. Another board member seconded the motion. The president called for a vote. It was 4-1 in favor, with Tiffany as the only dissenting vote. Karen is outvoted so hard the room laughs. People actually laughed. A ripple of relieved, slightly vindictive laughter that spread through the rows of chairs. Tiffany's smug smile vanishes when the room turns on her. She grabbed her rolling file cart and walked out of the hearing without another word. But the story was not over yet. The next day, I got a call from the tow company that Tiffany had been working with. The driver said he had been scheduled to tow my car from the neighborhood guest lot later that week, even though I had never parked there and had no outstanding violations. He said he was calling to cancel the tow because he had heard about the hearing and did not want to be part of whatever Tiffany was trying to pull. I asked if he had any records of previous calls from Tiffany, and he said he would send them over. The records arrived that afternoon. They showed dozens of tow requests over the past 2 years, many of them for vehicles that had valid guest passes or were parked legally. The call logs also showed that Tiffany had been receiving a referral fee for every tow, which explained why she was so aggressive about enforcement. It was a clear conflict of interest, and it was enough to trigger a formal investigation by the HOA management company. A week later, the HOA management company sent a letter to all residents. The letter announced that Tiffany Wilson was no longer serving as vendor coordinator, and that the board was conducting a full audit of all enforcement actions taken over the past 3 years. The letter also included an apology to residents who had been unfairly targeted, and a commitment to update the community guidelines to prevent future abuses. But I was not satisfied yet. I wanted more than just an apology. I wanted the HOA to refund every dollar they had tried to extract from me, and I wanted a guarantee that they would not come after me again. I hired an attorney, a guy Angela recommended who specialized in HOA disputes. He drafted a demand letter outlining everything: the fabricated violations, the retaliatory enforcement, the conflict of interest with the tow company, and the attempted contact with my employer. The letter demanded a full refund of all fines and fees, a written no-contact directive barring Tiffany from any further involvement in enforcement actions against me, and a policy change banning retaliatory enforcement with penalties for violations. The HOA board met 2 days later to discuss the demand. Harold, the retired lawyer on the board, pushed hard for a settlement. He said the evidence was overwhelming and that fighting it would cost the HOA tens of thousands in legal fees. The board voted to accept the terms. A settlement includes full fee refunds, a no-contact directive, and a written ban on retaliatory enforcement with penalties for violations. The HOA refunds the fence-related fines and fees, a check that arrived in my mailbox less than a week later. The best part came a few weeks later. The HOA held a special election to replace the board president who had resigned after the scandal. Angela decided to run, and she won by a landslide. Her first act as president was to hire a new management company, one that had no ties to Tiffany or the old board. Her second act was to publish the updated community guidelines online, with a clear appeals process and strict limits on enforcement discretion. As for Tiffany, she moved out of the neighborhood about 2 months after the hearing. I heard from Angela that she had been fired from her job at a local property management firm after word got out about the kickback scheme. The last time I saw her was at a gas station near the highway. She was pumping gas, and when she saw me pull into the next lane, she got into her car and drove away without finishing. I did not say anything. I just watched her go. The fence is still standing, exactly where it was always supposed to be. I added a small garden along the inside edge, and I planted some shrubs that will fill in over the next few years. Every time I look at it, I think about how close I came to letting Tiffany bully me into tearing it down. But I did not. I stood my ground, I kept my records, and I used her own tactics against her. A documented appeal that overturns the decision on the record was the key. That, and the fact that she could not resist putting everything in writing. Looking back, the whole thing feels surreal. I never thought I would end up in a legal battle over a fence, and I definitely never thought I would win. But I did, and it taught me something important about HOA conflicts. The people who run these boards are not invincible. They make mistakes, they overreach, and when you have the evidence to prove it, they fold. The trick is knowing when to fight, how to document everything, and when to bring in the big guns. If you are dealing with an HOA that is out of control, my advice is simple. Keep records of everything, every email, every notice, every conversation. Take photos, save screenshots, and do not be afraid to ask for help. Find allies in your neighborhood, people who have been through the same thing and know how the system works. And if the HOA crosses the line, do not hesitate to lawyer up. It might cost you some money up front, but it is worth it if it keeps them from steamrolling you. The funny thing is, after everything that happened, the neighborhood actually got better. The new board under Angela is transparent, fair, and responsive. They post meeting agendas online, they respond to emails within 24 hours, and they do not try to invent rules on the fly. Enforcement is still a thing, but it is consistent and reasonable. People are not walking around on eggshells anymore, wondering if they are going to get fined for painting their mailbox the wrong color. And as for me, I am still driving the city bus, still keeping odd hours, and still enjoying my backyard with the fence that started this whole mess. I added a fire pit last fall, and I have been hosting small cookouts with Angela and a few other neighbors. It feels good to have a space that is mine, where I can relax without worrying about someone showing up with a tape measure and a vendetta. I will talk to you again soon.